The first sign of trouble wasn't the screaming. On station Kepler. 7. Screaming was common enough. Traders arguing over prices, tourists reacting to their first glimpse of a Thraxian malt, or someone discovering they'd accidentally ordered fermented Zephyrian beetle larvae instead of standard protein paste. No. The first sign was the silence that followed. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was reviewing trade agreements in her office when the silence reached her. It pressed against the walls like a living thing, heavy with the weight of held breath and suppressed fury. She'd heard that kind of silence exactly twice before in her diplomatic career, once during the Centauri mining revolt, and once when a Cathara diplomat had publicly insulted a Mandalorian war veteran. Both times, people had died. The second sign was her aide, Marcus Chen, bursting through her office doors without announcing himself. Marcus was the kind of man who said please to vending machines and thank you to automatic doors. In 3 years of working together, Elena had never seen him move faster than a dignified walk. Now he was running. "Ambassador, we have a situation in the civilian quarters," Marcus said, his words coming in sharp bursts. "Level 7, Section C. It's involving a child." Elena was already reaching for her emergency communicator. "What kind of situation?" A hegemony security officer named Vextar Quintilian was conducting what he called a routine inspection of human civilian quarters. He found a family, the Johnsons, with their 8-year-old daughter Sarah. Marcus's hands were shaking as he pulled up the incident report on his datapad. According to witnesses, the girl was playing with a small toy, a stuffed animal from Earth. Officer Quintilian declared it contraband. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. The hegemony's definition of contraband was notoriously broad and arbitrarily enforced. The toys were usually overlooked. What happened? The girl wouldn't give it up. It was a gift from her grandmother who died last year. When her father tried to intervene, Quintilian stunned him with his riot baton. Marcus swallowed hard. Then he grabbed the toy from the child. When she started crying and reached for it, the paws stretched too long. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. When she reached for it, what? He broke her arm, snapped it clean, said she needed to learn proper respect for authority. Marcus's voice had gone flat, emotionless. It was the tone people used when the alternative was screaming. Then he threw the toy into an incineration chute. The third sign of trouble was Elena's own reaction. She'd been a diplomat for 15 years, trained to find peaceful solutions, to de-escalate conflicts, to see all sides of every issue. But right now, listening to the description of a grown alien breaking a human child's arm over a stuffed animal, she found herself thinking about the hunting knife her grandfather had given her, the one she kept locked in her personal quarters, the one she'd sworn never to use except in the most extreme circumstances. She pushed those thoughts aside. She was a professional. Where is the child now? Medical bay. Her parents are with her. But Ambassador? Marcus hesitated. That's not the worst part. Elena's blood pressure spiked. There's a worse part? The other humans on the station are gathering. Word is spreading through every human residential section, every human-operated business, every human ship currently docked. They're not talking about filing complaints or requesting hearings. Marcus's hands were steady now, but his eyes held a hardness Elena had never seen before. They're talking about justice. Through her office window, Elena could see down into the station's main concourse. What she saw made her understand why Marcus was scared. Humans were walking with purpose through the crowds of aliens. Not running, not shouting, not carrying weapons. At least, none that were visible. But there was something in their movement, something predatory and coordinated, that made every other species unconsciously step aside. It reminded Elena of something she'd read once in a xenobiology report. When pack hunters begin to coordinate, their prey doesn't need to see the planning to know death is coming. The prey can feel it in the air, in the change of pressure, in the subtle shift from normal life to lethal intent. Have you contacted station security? I tried. Chief Morland says his human officers have all called in sick with something called blue flu. The alien security forces are reluctant to get involved in what they're calling an internal human matter. Elena stared at Marcus. 57% of this station's security force just disappeared. 63% actually. Some of the non-human officers have also reported sick. Marcus pulled up another report. The Thraxian deputy chief used a phrase that roughly translates to, "Not touching this with my molting claws." The fourth sign of trouble was the message that came through Elena's emergency channel. It was from Captain James Morrison, commanding officer of the human dreadnought Zeus's Thunder, currently docked for routine maintenance. Ambassador Vasquez, this is Captain Morrison. I need to inform you that my ship has experienced a complete failure of our departure systems. We estimate repairs will take indefinitely. I thought you should know, in case anyone asks why a human military vessel is remaining in station for an extended period. Morrison out. Elena stared at the communicator. Zeus's Thunder was 3 months ahead of schedule on all maintenance. Its departure systems had been certified just that morning. And James Morrison was not the kind of man to make jokes about false mechanical failures, unless he was sending a very different kind of message. Marcus, I need you to get me everything. Every record, every report, every witness statement about this Quintillion character. And I need to know exactly which regulations he was supposedly enforcing when he hurt that child. While Marcus worked, Elena opened a secure channel to Earth. She needed guidance from the colonial administration. Needed someone to tell her what protocols existed for a situation like this. But as she waited for the connection, she found herself thinking about her grandfather again. He'd been a soldier once, before he became a farmer. He'd told her stories about humanity's early days in space, about colonies that had been attacked by raiders, about the weeks or months it took for help to arrive from Earth. He told her about the choices colonists had to make when they couldn't wait for proper authorities, proper procedures, proper justice. Sometimes, he'd said, teaching 8-year-old Elena how to gut a fish, you can't wait for someone else to do what's right. Sometimes you have to be willing to do it yourself, even if it costs you everything. Elena had thought he was talking about fishing. Now she understood he'd been talking about something much more fundamental. The connection to Earth finally went through, but the face that appeared on her screen wasn't from the colonial administration. It was Director Sarah Hammond from something called the Special Circumstances Office, a department Elena had never heard of. Ambassador Vasquez, Director Hammond said without preamble. I understand there's been an incident involving harm to a human child by alien authority figures. Yes, ma'am. I was hoping to get guidance on proper diplomatic protocols for... There are no protocols for this situation, Ambassador. Hammond's voice was flat. Not because we haven't planned for it, but because we've hoped it would never happen. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Elena felt the bottom drop out of her world. Ma'am, 3 years ago, our xenopsychologists identified what they called the fundamental incompatibility problem. Most alien species don't understand human protective instincts toward children. They see our young as small, weak, and expendable. They don't understand that threatening a human child isn't like threatening a human adult. It's like threatening the future of our entire species. Director Hammond paused, and Elena could hear something like sadness in her voice. We've tried to educate them. We've written papers, held seminars, created cultural exchange programs. We thought we were making progress. Another pause. We were wrong. Ma'am, what exactly are you telling me? I'm telling you that, as of 18 minutes ago, every human military vessel within 6 months' travel of your position has experienced critical system failures that require them to remain in place. I'm telling you that 17 of our deepest cover intelligence assets throughout the hegemony have just activated. I'm telling you that the Colonial Senate has declared a closed session and invoked something called the Terror Protocol. Elena's hands went cold. I've never heard of the Terror Protocol. Most people haven't. It was written by the survivors of the Eridani colony massacre. It states that when alien authorities harm human children under their protection, the human response will be immediate, disproportionate, and final. Hammond's image flickered, and Elena realized she was speaking from a secure bunker somewhere. Ambassador, I need you to understand, this is no longer a diplomatic incident. This is a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Of why. In 400 years of human expansion into space, no alien species has ever successfully occupied a human world. Of why human ships don't surrender, even when facing hopeless odds. Of why, when humans say, never again, we mean never again for anyone, anywhere, at any time. Elena stared at the screen. Director, you're talking about people taking the law into their own hands. No, Ambassador. I'm talking about people being the law. Human law. Applied to anyone who thinks human children are acceptable casualties in their power games. The connection cut out, leaving Elena alone with the silence that was no longer quite so silent. She could hear something now, thrumming through the station's hull. It wasn't machinery. She knew the sound of every system on Kepler 7. This was something else, something organic. It was the sound of humans walking in rhythm. Not marching, that would have triggered security alerts. Just walking. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all moving with the same deliberate pace toward the same destination. Elena looked out her window again and saw them. They filled the concourse now, a river of human faces flowing between islands of nervous alien bystanders. They weren't carrying weapons, weren't wearing uniforms, weren't displaying any signs of organization, but they moved like a single organism, like a pack that had found its prey's scent. At their head walked a woman Elena recognized, Dr. Janet Morrison, the station's chief medical officer. In her arms she carried a small figure wrapped in medical blankets. Sarah Johnson, the 8-year-old with the broken arm. Elena understood what she was seeing. This wasn't a mob seeking vengeance. This was something far more dangerous. It was a species demonstrating why they had earned the right to walk among the stars. Marcus appeared at her elbow. Ambassador, I've got the information you requested about Officer Quintillion. His voice was carefully neutral. It's interesting. How interesting? The regulation he cited doesn't exist. There is no hegemony law against children possessing toys. He made it up. Marcus's hands were steady now, but Elena could see the fury burning behind his professional demeanor. He broke a child's arm and destroyed her most precious possession for no reason other than his own amusement. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her grandfather's knife again. This time she didn't push the thought away. Marcus, I need you to send a message to Officer Quintillion. Tell him I want to see him in my office immediately. Ma'am, I don't think he's going to come. Word is he's barricaded himself in the Hegemony Security Office with about 20 other non-human officers. They're claiming sanctuary under interspecies law. Elena opened her eyes and looked out at the river of humans flowing through the concourse. Marcus, do you have children? He blinked at the sudden change of subject. Yes, ma'am. Twin daughters, 6 years old. If someone broke one of their arms for fun, what would you do? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held the same flat, emotionless tone he'd used earlier. I would make sure they never had the opportunity to hurt another child, even if it meant losing your career, your freedom, your life. Especially then. Because what kind of world would I be leaving my daughters if I didn't? Elena nodded slowly. She understood now why the station had gone quiet, why the human security officers had called in sick, why Captain Morrison's ship had developed mysterious mechanical problems. She understood why Director Hammond had mentioned the Terror Protocol, and why 17 intelligence assets had just activated. This wasn't about law or diplomacy or proper procedures. This was about something much older and much more fundamental. This was about the promise every species makes to its young, that the adults will protect them no matter the cost. And when that promise is broken by outsiders, well, the galaxy was about to learn exactly what happened then. Elena reached for her communicator and opened a channel to Station Command. This is Ambassador Vasquez. I need to speak with Station Commander Thalix immediately. While she waited for the connection, she watched the humans below. They had reached the central hub now, where the major thoroughfares intersected. Dr. Morrison was speaking to them, her voice too low for Elena to hear through the office windows, but her meaning clear in her gestures and the way the crowd responded. Elena had seen briefings about human pack dynamics, but she'd never witnessed them firsthand. The way the crowd moved, the way decisions seemed to flow through them without any visible communication, the way they naturally formed defensive positions around their wounded member. It was like watching a military unit that had never needed training because their tactics were written into their bones. Station Commander Thalex's image appeared on Elena's screen. The Kaldorian looked agitated, his usually pristine uniform disheveled, his 4 eyes darting nervously. Ambassador Vasquez, thank the stars. You must help me understand what is happening. My security systems show massive human population movement, but no hostile actions, no weapons violations, no disturbances. Yet my non-human residents are terrified. Several species have locked themselves in their quarters and are requesting immediate evacuation. Elena chose her words carefully. Commander, I understand there was an incident earlier involving a human child and a hegemony security officer. Yes, regrettable but minor. Property damage, minor injury. These things happen in multicultural environments. Surely this cannot justify. He gestured helplessly at his screens. Whatever this is. Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Commander, did you just describe the deliberate breaking of a child's arm as a minor injury? Thalex's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. Well, yes, the human offspring will heal. They are remarkably resilient. I understand Officer Quintillion has filed a proper report explaining the necessity of his actions. The silence stretched between them. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the pulse of rage building in her temples. She had spent 15 years learning to see all perspectives, to understand cultural differences, to find common ground between species with vastly different values. But some differences weren't cultural. Some differences were moral. "Commander," she said very quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. You described the deliberate torture of a child as regrettable but minor. Is that really your position? Ambassador, you are being dramatic. Children are injured in the course of proper discipline across many species. The human emotional attachment to offspring is well documented but considered excessive by most galactic standards." Elena stood up slowly. Through her window, she could see that more humans had joined the gathering in the concourse. Station personnel, ship crews, civilian contractors, even humans who had been sleeping during their rest cycles were emerging from their quarters. "Commander, how many human children live on this station?" "Approximately 237, Thalix replied automatically. "Why do you ask?" "And how many human adults?" "Just over 8,000, including temporary residents and ship crews." Elena nodded. "Commander, I want you to imagine something for me. I want you to imagine that every one of those 8,000 adults is currently thinking the same thing. That if the station's authority figures won't protect their children, then station authority has forfeited its legitimacy. Ambassador, surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Commander. I'm telling you what I'm observing. Every human on this station now believes that their children are in danger from forces that consider breaking their arms to be regrettable but minor. What do you think their logical response would be?" Kylex's four eyes widened in what Elena recognized as the Kjaldorian equivalent of dawning horror. They cannot simply ignore station authority. There are laws, regulations, proper procedures. Commander, whose laws? The hegemony's? The same hegemony whose officer just tortured a child for amusement? The same hegemony whose other officers are calling it regrettable but minor? Elena's voice remained level, professional. If station authority won't protect human children from alien aggression, why should humans recognize station authority at all? The connection flickered, and Elena could hear alarms beginning to sound in the background on Thalex's end. He looked away from the screen, consulting displays she couldn't see. "Ambassador, I'm showing massive power fluctuations throughout the station. Multiple critical systems are reporting anomalies. How is this possible?" Elena wasn't surprised. She had suspected this was coming from the moment Marcus told her about the security officers calling in sick. "Commander, what percentage of your technical staff is human?" 78% of engineering, 62% of life support systems, 89% of. Thalex stopped speaking, his four eyes focusing on Elena with laser intensity. "Ambassador, surely you're not implying that human technical personnel would sabotage station systems?" "I'm not implying anything, Commander. But if I were a human engineer, and I believed that the station's authority was actively threatening human children, I might start to wonder whether that authority deserved to have functioning life support." It wasn't quite a threat. It was something much more dangerous. It was a prediction. Elena cut the connection and walked to her window. The gathering in the concourse had grown larger. She could see humans emerging from maintenance shafts, service corridors, and restricted areas that should have been impossible to access without proper authorization. They weren't breaking in. They were walking through security checkpoints that were mysteriously failing to register their passage. Dr. Morrison was no longer at the front of the crowd. That position had been taken by a man Elena didn't recognize, someone tall and lean, with the kind of scars that suggested military experience. He wasn't giving speeches or rallying cries. He was simply standing there, and somehow his presence was organizing thousands of people into something that looked less like a mob and more like an army. Elena opened her emergency files and began composing a report to Earth. She tried several different opening lines before settling on simple honesty. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Station Kepler, 7. At 1347 station time, Hegemony Security Officer Vexstar Quintillion deliberately broke the arm of 8-year-old Sarah Johnson while confiscating her stuffed animal under a fabricated regulation. As of 1420 station time, every human on this station has chosen to interpret this action as a declaration of war against human children. I am no longer confident in my ability to prevent the situation from escalating beyond diplomatic resolution." She paused, then added, "Request immediate guidance on whether Earth's position is to protect our children or protect our diplomatic relationships. I do not believe we can do both." As she finished the report, Elena heard a new sound echoing through the station's corridors. It was singing. Hundreds of human voices raised in harmony, but not in any song she recognized. It was something old, something primal, something that made her think of ancient campfires and tribal gatherings. She realized it was a lullaby. Thousands of humans, preparing to do something terrible, were singing a lullaby for a little girl whose arm had been broken by someone who thought human children didn't matter. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her grandfather's knife. One more time. This time, she made her decision. The knife was exactly where Elena remembered leaving it, locked in the personal safe in her quarters, wrapped in the same cloth her grandfather had used to clean it after teaching her to gut fish. The blade was still sharp enough to split hairs, its edge holding the kind of perfection that came from centuries of careful maintenance passed down through generations. Elena had never expected to unwrap it for anything other than sentimental reasons. She clipped the sheath to a belt hidden beneath her diplomatic jacket and returned to the administrative levels. The station felt different now, not just quieter, but fundamentally changed, as if the basic rules governing how it operated had been rewritten while she wasn't looking. The first sign of that change was the elevator. Elena pressed the button for Level 7, Section C, the civilian quarters where the Johnson family lived. Instead of stopping at her destination, the elevator continued down to the engineering levels, its displays showing destinations that definitely weren't on Elena's access list. When the doors opened, she found herself face-to-face with Chief Engineer Sarah Kowalski, a woman Elena had met perhaps 3 times in casual diplomatic functions. Kowalski was holding a plasma torch in one hand and what looked like a critical system component in the other. "Ambassador," Kowalski said, nodding politely. "Figured you might want to see this." Elena stepped out of the elevator, though she had no idea why she was following a potentially mutinous engineer into the restricted bowels of the station. "Chief Kowalski, what exactly am I looking at?" "Life support override controls," Kowalski said, hefting the component, specifically the ones that allow Station Command to selectively shut off atmosphere to different sections. Funny thing about those, they tend to malfunction when exposed to certain electromagnetic frequencies. Elena stared at the destroyed component, understanding dawning slowly. "You've made it impossible for Station Command to cut off air to the human residential sections."
"Well, now, that would be sabotage, wouldn't it?" Kowalski's smile was sharp enough to cut steel.
"This here's just a maintenance issue. Equipment failures happen all the time. Sometimes whole systems go down, and there's nothing anybody can do about it except wait for replacement parts." "And how long do replacement parts typically take to arrive?"
"Oh, months usually."
"Sometimes years if there are shipping complications." Elena looked around the engineering level and saw humans working at every station, their movements efficient and coordinated. None of them were looking at her directly, but she could feel their attention like weight. These weren't random technical personnel. These were people who understood every system on the station, every safety protocol, every emergency procedure. People who could keep the humans alive indefinitely, even if the rest of the station's population had to be evacuated. "Chief Kowalski, I need to ask you something directly." "Yes, ma'am." "If Station Command decides to resolve this situation by spacing the human residential sections, what happens?" Kowalski set down her plasma torch and looked Elena directly in the eyes. "Ambassador, if anyone tries to space human civilians over what happened to that little girl, they'll discover that life support isn't the only system we maintain." She gestured around the engineering level. "Artificial gravity, structural integrity, reactor containment, navigation, communications, all of it runs through systems that humans built, humans maintain, and humans can unmake." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. "You're telling me that humans could destroy this station?" "I'm telling you that humans built this station, Ambassador. Most of it, anyway. We know where every support beam is located, every power conduit, every structural weak point." Kowalski's voice remained conversational, even friendly. "We know which systems have to keep running to prevent the reactor from overloading, which hull sections are held together by emergency welds, which artificial gravity generators are running past their recommended service life." Elena felt her diplomatic training warring with something much more primitive. Part of her was horrified at the implications of what Kowalski was describing. The other part, the part that carried her grandfather's knife, was grimly satisfied that human children would not be harmed again without consequences. "This is insurrection," Elena said quietly. "No, ma'am," Kowalski replied. "This is building maintenance. We're just making sure that the people responsible for protecting children have all the information they need to make good decisions." Elena's communicator chimed with an emergency message. The text was from Marcus. "Ambassador, you need to see the medical bay. Now." Elena left the engineering level, with Kowalski's words echoing in her mind. The elevator took her directly to the medical bay this time, but when the doors opened, she understood why Marcus had sounded so urgent. The medical bay was full of humans. Not patients, visitors. They lined the corridors, filled the waiting areas, and stood in small groups around the rooms. Elena recognized faces from every human-operated business on the station, every ship crew, every residential section. They weren't talking loudly or making demands. They were just there, watching, waiting, making sure that 8-year-old Sarah Johnson knew she wasn't alone. Elena found Marcus near the main treatment room, his face grim. How is she? Physically? She'll heal completely. Morrison set the bone perfectly, and human children are resilient. Marcus paused, looking through the transparent wall into the treatment room. Emotionally, that's going to take longer. Elena could see the child through the wall, lying in a medical bed with her arm in a regeneration cast. Her parents sat on either side of the bed, but Sarah's attention was focused on something else. A small crowd of humans who had gathered just outside her room. They weren't speaking to her, weren't trying to entertain her or cheer her up. They were simply standing guard. Marcus, what's the latest from Station Command? Commander Thalex has requested emergency evacuation ships for all non-human residents. He's claiming the station is experiencing critical system failures that make continued habitation unsafe. Marcus showed Elena his datapad. 3 hegemony cruisers are already en route. ETA is 6 hours. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. What about the humans? Officially, we've been advised that evacuation ships will be made available once the technical issues are resolved. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. Unofficially, I think they're planning to abandon us here and let us deal with the system failures ourselves.
The sound of Elena's grandfather's knife pressing against her hip was suddenly very loud in her mind.
They're going to leave 8,000 humans on a station they claim is critically damaged? It gets better.
I've been monitoring hegemony communications. They're spinning this as a human technical malfunction that demonstrates why our species can't be trusted with advanced technology. Marcus pulled up another report. According to their official statements, human emotional instability has caused us to sabotage our own habitat in irrational response to routine law enforcement. Elena stared at the report, reading the clinical language describing how humans had overreacted to minor disciplinary action and created a safety hazard through uncontrolled emotional responses. The report classified the breaking of Sarah Johnson's arm as standard restraint procedures and recommended enhanced oversight of human populations throughout hegemony space. They're not just abandoning us, Elena said slowly. They're creating a legal justification for occupying human colonies.
That's what I'm thinking.
This becomes a precedent. Humans can't be trusted to govern themselves. Human reactions to authority are inherently dangerous. Human communities need constant supervision to prevent technical malfunction incidents. Elena closed her eyes and saw the larger picture forming. This wasn't just about one sadistic officer who had hurt a child for fun. This was about power, control, and the fundamental question of whether humans would be treated as equals in galactic society or managed as dangerous pets. And the answer to that question was being written right now, in the choices made by everyone on this station. Ambassador? A new voice interrupted her thoughts. Elena turned to see Dr. Calm, Janet Morrison approaching, her medical coat stained with Sarah's blood. I need to speak with you privately. Elena followed Dr. Rowe, Morrison to a small office off the main medical bay. Morrison closed the door and activated a privacy screen before speaking. Ambassador, I've been in contact with medical professionals on 17 other human stations and colonies. As of 2 hours ago, they've all reported similar incidents involving hegemony security forces and human children. Morrison's voice was steady, but Elena could see rage burning in her eyes. Minor injuries, confiscated possessions, psychological intimidation, all documented as routine enforcement actions. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. 17 other incidents? Today? All within the past 6 hours. All involving children between 6 and 12 years old. All following the same pattern: trumped-up violations, excessive force, deliberate humiliation. Morrison pulled up medical reports on her datapad. Ambassador, this wasn't random. This was coordinated. The implications crashed over Elena like a tsunami. They're testing us. That's what I think. They wanted to see how humans would respond to systematic brutalization of our children. They picked children specifically because they assumed we'd be too civilized to respond proportionally to attacks on non-combatants. Elena thought about the humans gathered in the medical bay, about Chief Kowalski's casual discussion of bringing down the entire station. About Captain Morrison's mysteriously malfunctioning ship. They tested the wrong species. Yes, they did. Dr. Morrison's smile was sharp as a scalpel. And now they're about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Elena's communicator chimed again. This time the message was from Earth. Not from the Colonial Administration or the Special Circumstances Office, but from the office of the Prime Minister himself. Elena read the message twice before she understood what she was seeing. Ambassador Vasquez, you are hereby authorized to take any and all actions necessary to protect human civilians under your care. Legal, diplomatic, and financial immunity has been granted for all decisions made in pursuit of this objective. The full resources of the Terran Colonial Defense Force have been placed at your disposal. Repeat. You have unlimited authority to protect our children. Use it, Prime Minister Chen. Elena stared at the message, understanding that everything had just changed. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was the representative of a species that had just declared open season on anyone who threatened their young. Dr. Morrison, I need to ask you something important. Yes, ma'am. In your medical opinion, what would be the appropriate response to someone who deliberately broke a child's arm for amusement? Doctor. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held the same flat, emotionless tone Elena had heard from Marcus earlier. In my medical opinion, anyone capable of torturing a child for entertainment represents a clear and present danger to all children in their vicinity. The appropriate response would be to ensure they never have the opportunity to hurt another child. Even if that meant, especially if that meant, Dr. Morrison looked Elena directly in the eyes. Ambassador, I took an oath to first do no harm, but that oath has a corollary that most people don't know about. When someone is actively harming the innocent, stopping them becomes a medical necessity. Elena nodded slowly. She understood now why humans had gathered in the medical bay, why Chief Kowalski was dismantling life support systems, why Captain Morrison's ship had developed convenient mechanical problems. She understood why 17 intelligence assets had activated, and why the Prime Minister of Earth had just given her unlimited authority. This wasn't about revenge, this wasn't about justice. This was about making sure that what happened to Sarah Johnson never happened to any human child ever again. And if that required dismantling the entire power structure that had allowed it to happen, well, the galaxy was about to learn exactly how far humans were willing to go to protect their young. Elena left the medical bay and made her way toward the Hegemony Security Office, where Officer Quintillion and his colleagues had barricaded themselves. She didn't hurry. There was no need to hurry. After all, they weren't going anywhere. The corridors leading to the security office were lined with humans. Not blocking passage, not making threats, just standing quietly along the walls. Elena recognized the pattern from her xenobiology briefings. It was the way pack predators positioned themselves when herding prey toward a killing ground. As she walked, Elena became aware of a low, thrumming sound echoing through the station's hull. It wasn't mechanical. She was sure of that now. It was thousands of human voices humming in harmony. Not a song exactly, but something older and more primal. Something that spoke of ancient hunts and blood debts, and the promise that the pack always protects its own. Elena reached the security office and found it exactly as Marcus had described. Sealed blast doors, emergency lockdown protocols active. Every defensive measure the station possessed engaged to protect the aliens inside. What Marcus hadn't mentioned was the human standing directly in front of the blast doors. Elena didn't recognize him, but she recognized his type. Military bearing, old scars, eyes that had seen too much violence and were prepared to see more. He wasn't wearing any rank insignia or unit patches, but Elena knew a professional soldier when she saw one. "Ma'am," he said, nodding politely. "Colonel Michael Torres, Terran Colonial Marines, retired. I understand you might need to have a conversation with the individuals inside." Elena looked at the sealed blast doors, then at Colonel Torres. "Colonel, those doors are rated to withstand direct hits from ship-mounted plasma cannons."
Yes, ma'am, they are.
Torres's smile was barely visible, but it contained enough violence to level cities. Of course, they're also connected to the station's power grid, which runs through systems maintained by humans. And they require atmospheric pressure to maintain their seal integrity, which is controlled by life support systems that are experiencing technical difficulties. As if summoned by his words, the blast doors flickered, just for a moment, but long enough for Elena to see the terrified faces of the aliens inside. "How long can they maintain their barricade, Colonel?" "Oh, well, ma'am, that depends on how long they can hold their breath." Torres consulted a timepiece. Current atmospheric pressure in their section is dropping at a rate of approximately 2% per minute. They've got maybe 15 minutes before they start passing out. Alina stared at him. You're suffocating them. No, ma'am. We're experiencing technical difficulties with the atmospheric recycling systems. These things happen in complex environments. Torres's expression remained perfectly professional.
Of course, if they were to open their doors and come out to discuss the situation, I'm sure our engineering teams could prioritize repairs to their section. Elena understood.
This wasn't execution. It was negotiation.
The aliens inside had a choice. They could stay barricaded and suffocate, or they could come out and face whatever consequences humans had decided were appropriate for breaking a child's arm. Either way, they were no longer in control of the situation. Elena's communicator chimed one final time. The message was from Station Commander Thalex. Ambassador, please help. We are trapped. The humans have seized control of all critical systems. They are not responding to our surrender offers. What do they want? Elena read the message and thought about 8-year-old Sarah Johnson lying in the medical bay with a broken arm. She thought about 17 other human children who had been hurt today as part of some sick test of human resolve. She thought about the reports describing these attacks as minor disciplinary actions and routine enforcement. She thought about her grandfather's knife and about the promises every species makes to its young. Then she composed her reply. Commander, they want to ensure that no alien authority figure ever harms another human child. I suggest you ask Officer Quintilian if he thinks that's a reasonable request. She sent the message and turned to Colonel Torres. Colonel, when those doors open, I want to be the first person Officer Quintilian sees.
Yes, ma'am.
Any particular reason? Eleanor touched the knife at her hip and smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. I want to give him a chance to explain his actions to someone who understands the consequences of harming children. Torres nodded approvingly. I think he'll find that educational, ma'am. The blast doors flickered again, and Elena could hear shouting from inside. Desperate, terrified shouting in languages she didn't recognize, but tones she understood perfectly. It was the sound of predators discovering they had become prey, and the hunt was just beginning. The blast doors opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and Officer Vextar Quintilian stumbled out first, gasping for breath that tasted of human control. He was a hegemony standard, tall, segmented carapace, compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums, mandibles designed for tearing flesh. Under normal circumstances, he would have been an intimidating figure to any human. These were not normal circumstances. Elena watched him scan the corridor, taking in the humans lined along the walls, the controlled atmosphere, the fact that his species' most advanced defensive position had been reduced to a suffocation trap in less than an hour. She saw the exact moment when his compound eyes focused on her, and he realized he was looking at the human authority figure he'd have to answer to.
His mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as hegemony nervous laughter. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his translator rendering his voice in perfectly polite standard.
I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly. There seems to have been some sort of technical malfunction with your station systems. Elena stepped forward until she was close enough to see her reflection in his compound eyes. Officer Quintilian, I'd like to discuss the technical malfunction that occurred when you broke a child's arm. The nervous laughter stopped. Ambassador, I was conducting a routine inspection. The human juvenile was in possession of contraband materials. When she resisted proper authority, I was forced to use minimum necessary force to... Stop! Elena's voice cut through his explanation like her grandfather's knife through fish bones.
Officer, I've reviewed the regulations you claim to be enforcing. They don't exist. Quintilian's mandibles twitched.
I'm sure there was simply a clerical error in the database. These bureaucratic systems are so complex. You fabricated a law to justify torturing a child. Elena's voice remained conversational, but Colonel Torres shifted slightly behind her, and she could feel the attention of every human in the corridor, focusing on Quintilian like sunlight through a magnifying glass. You took a stuffed animal away from an 8-year-old girl, and when she cried, you broke her arm. The human juvenile needed to learn proper respect for authority. Whose authority? Elena interrupted. Your authority to hurt children? Your authority to make up laws? Your authority to torture people weaker than you for your own amusement? Eleanor could see other aliens emerging from the security office behind Quintilian, station security officers, hegemony administrators. A few she recognized as trade representatives. All of them were looking around the corridor with the same expression, the dawning realization that they were completely surrounded by a species they had fundamentally misunderstood.
Officer Quintilian, Elena continued, I want you to think very carefully about your next words.
Because everything you say from this point forward is being recorded by 17 different intelligence agencies, transmitted to 4 different human worlds, and will be used to determine how humanity responds to anyone who thinks our children are acceptable targets. Quintilian's compound eyes darted around the corridor, taking in the silent humans, the controlled atmosphere, the fact that his strongest defensive position had been casually dismantled by people he'd assumed were weak and compliant. Ambassador, surely we can negotiate. Negotiate? Elena's voice dropped to a whisper, and somehow that was more terrifying than shouting would have been. Officer, you think this is a negotiation? Elena reached inside her jacket and withdrew her grandfather's knife. She didn't draw it from its sheath, just held it where Quintilian could see it. The blade was old, worn from generations of use, but its edge caught the corridor lights like captured starfire. This knife belonged to my grandfather. He carried it through the colony wars, through the Eridani siege, through 7 different conflicts where humans had to fight for the right to protect their families. Elena turned the sheath slowly in her hands, and Quintilian's compound eyes tracked the movement like he was watching his own death approach. He gave it to me when I became a diplomat, and he told me something I never understood until today. What? What did he tell you? He told me that diplomacy only works when both sides agree that some things are unacceptable. That negotiation only happens between people who share certain basic values. Elena looked up from the knife and met Quintilian's compound eyes. He told me that when someone proves they don't share those values, when they prove they think torture is acceptable, when they prove they think children are disposable, then diplomacy ends. Elena slid the knife back into her jacket, but the threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Officer Quintilian, you are going to walk with me to the medical bay. You are going to see what you did to Sarah Johnson. You are going to look at her broken arm, at her parents' faces, at the children who are afraid to sleep tonight because they know there are monsters like you in their world. Elena's voice remained perfectly level. And then you are going to explain to me why I shouldn't let Colonel Torres and his friends teach you what humans do to monsters. Elena turned and began walking toward the medical bay. She didn't look back to see if Quintilian was following. She could hear his footsteps behind her, could smell the pheromones of fear that his species released when facing mortal danger. The journey through the station was a lesson in human pack dynamics that no xenobiology textbook could have captured. As Elena walked, humans emerged from side corridors, from service areas, from spaces that shouldn't have been accessible. They didn't follow directly. That would have been threatening. Instead, they simply appeared wherever Elena and Quintilian were going, creating a moving corridor of human attention that made it clear the alien was being herded. Elena could feel Quintilian's growing panic in the way his breathing quickened, in the clicking sounds his mandibles made, in the way he kept looking over his shoulders at humans who weren't doing anything threatening, but who somehow communicated infinite menace through their simple presence. They passed the engineering levels, where Elena could see humans working at every station, their movements coordinated in ways that suggested they were following a plan that had been rehearsed but never spoken aloud. Through the transparent walls, she could see displays showing station systems that were functioning perfectly under human control, life support optimized for human physiology, artificial gravity adjusted to Earth normal, security systems reconfigured to respond to human biometrics.
Ambassador! Quintilian's voice cracked slightly as he spoke.
How long has this been planned? Elena considered the question. Officer, I don't think you understand what you're seeing. This wasn't planned. This was inevitable. What do you mean? You hurt a human child. Everything that's happening now is just the natural consequence of that choice. Elena gestured around the corridor, where humans continued to appear and disappear in patterns that looked random, but felt anything but. Humans don't plan vengeance, Officer Quintilian. We simply remove threats to our young. It's as automatic as breathing. They reached the medical bay, and Elena could see that the gathering had grown larger. Hundreds of humans now filled the corridors and waiting areas, but their presence had a different quality than before. Less like mourning, more like a memorial service where the guest of honor was still alive. Elena led Quintilian through the crowd, towards Sarah Johnson's room. The humans parted to let them pass, but Elena could feel their attention like physical weight. These people weren't here for vengeance or justice or any abstract principle. They were here because an 8-year-old girl had been hurt, and they needed to see that the person who hurt her understood the magnitude of his error. Elena stopped in front of the transparent wall that allowed them to see into Sarah's room. The little girl was awake now, propped up in her bed with her arm in a regeneration cast. Her parents sat beside her, and Elena could see other children, human children from throughout the station, gathered around her bed, all of them trying to make her smile. "Look at her, Officer Quintillian." Elena watched Quintillian's compound eyes focus on the child. She saw his mandibles twitch as he took in the medical equipment, the frightened faces of the other children, the way Sarah's parents held her good hand like they were afraid she might disappear.
She's 8 years old, Elena continued.
Her favorite color is purple. She wants to be a xenobiologist when she grows up because she thinks alien life forms are fascinating. She has a collection of pressed flowers from 17 different worlds, and she can recite the periodic table in 4 languages. Elena paused, letting Quintillian process what he was seeing. 2 hours ago, she was playing with a stuffed animal her grandmother gave her before she died. It was shaped like a Terran bear, and Sarah named it Mr. Snuggles. She carried it everywhere because it reminded her of bedtime stories and hot chocolate, and feeling safe in a universe full of things that could hurt her. Elena could see Quintillian's fear building as he began to understand the scope of what he had destroyed. "You took Mr. Snuggles away from her, Officer Quintillian. You threw him into an incinerator and told her she needed to learn respect for authority. When she reached for the only thing she had left of her grandmother, you broke her arm." Elena turned away from the window and faced Quintillian directly. "Officer, I want you to understand something very clearly. That little girl has 8,000 humans on this station who consider her family. She has 17 million humans in this sector who consider her one of their own. She has 4 billion humans on Earth who will learn her name before this day is over." Elena could see terror in Quintillian's compound eyes now, the kind of deep, primal fear that comes from realizing you've made a mistake that can't be unmade. And every single one of those humans now knows that you think hurting children is acceptable behavior. Elena's communicator chimed, and she checked the message without taking her eyes off Quintillian. It was from Earth. A priority update from the Prime Minister's office. "Officer Quintillian, I've just received word that the Terran Colonial Senate has voted unanimously to invoke the Human Protection Act. Do you know what that means?" Quintillian's mandibles clicked weakly. "No, Ambassador. It means that as of 30 minutes ago, any harm to human children by alien authorities is considered an act of war against the human species. It means that every human military vessel in known space is now operating under wartime rules of engagement. It means that the protection of human children has been declared a species survival priority." Elena showed him the message display, where the official declaration was spelled out in stark, bureaucratic language that somehow made the threat more terrifying than any battle cry could have. "Officer, you didn't just hurt one little girl. You declared war on humanity's future. And now humanity is going to respond accordingly." Elena could hear movement behind her, hundreds of humans shifting position, changing formation, preparing for something she couldn't see but could feel in the air, like approaching thunder. "Ambassador?" Quintillian's voice was barely audible now. "What happens to me?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking through the window at Sarah Johnson, who was laughing now at something one of the other children had said. Her laugh was bright and clear and innocent, the sound of a child who had been hurt but who was surrounded by people who would never let it happen again. "That depends, Officer Quintillian." "On what?" Elena turned back to face him, and Quintillian could see something in her eyes that made him understand why humans had managed to spread across the galaxy, despite being physically smaller and weaker than most spacefaring species. "On whether you can convince 8,000 humans that you understand why what you did was wrong and that you will never ever hurt another child." Elena gestured towards the medical bay, where hundreds of humans waited in silence. "You have one chance to explain yourself to them, one chance to show genuine understanding of what you've done and genuine commitment to never doing it again, one chance to demonstrate that you can be trusted around human children." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her grandfather's knife. "If you fail to convince them, well, the Terran Colonial Defense Force isn't the only human organization that has rules about protecting children." Elena stepped aside, clearing the path between Quintillian and the gathered humans. She could see faces in the crowd now: parents, teachers, ship officers, engineers, medical personnel. People who had built their lives around protecting and nurturing the young, who had come to a distant station hoping to give their children a better future among the stars. People who had just learned that alien authorities considered their children acceptable casualties. "Your choice, Officer Quintillian. Speak to them and hope they believe you." Or, Elena's voice trailed off, leaving the alternative unspoken but understood. Quintillian looked at the crowd of humans, then at Sarah Johnson through the medical bay window, then at Elena's hand resting near her grandfather's knife. For the first time in his career as a hegemony security officer, Dexter Quintilian began to understand that authority was not something he possessed, but something that was granted by those who chose to respect it. And he was about to discover what happened when that respect was withdrawn. Elena watched as Quintilian took his first halting steps toward the crowd of humans. She could see the terror in his movements, the way his compound eyes darted around looking for escape routes that didn't exist, the way his mandibles clicked in nervous patterns that his translator couldn't interpret. But she could also see something else, the first glimmer of understanding that his actions had consequences beyond his ability to control them. It was a start. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Behind Elena, Colonel Torres moved closer. "Ma'am, we've received word from the other 17 stations. Similar situations are developing throughout human space." Elena nodded without taking her eyes off Quintilian. "How are they handling it, Colonel?" "Varies by location. Some of the alien authorities are cooperating, trying to make amends. Others are doubling down, claiming human overreaction justifies enhanced security measures." Elena felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "And what's happening to the ones who are doubling down?" Torres was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice held the same flat, emotionless tone Elena had heard from Marcus and Dr. Morrison. "They're discovering that humans built and maintain most of the critical infrastructure in their sectors, ma'am. They're learning that human cooperation isn't something they can take for granted. They're finding out what happens when a species that's spread across 400 worlds decides that protecting their children is more important than maintaining diplomatic relationships." Elena watched Quintilian reach the edge of the crowd. The humans parted to let him through, but she could see the way they looked at him. Not with hatred, but with the kind of cold evaluation that predators used when deciding whether something was a threat worth eliminating. "Colonel, how many alien authorities are starting to reconsider their positions?" "Most of them, ma'am. It turns out that when humans stop being cooperative, a lot of things in the galaxy stop working properly." Torres's smile was grim. "Amazing how many critical systems depend on human technical expertise." Elena nodded, understanding that what was happening on Station Kepler 7 was being replicated throughout human space. Across hundreds of worlds and stations, humans were demonstrating exactly how much the galaxy depended on their labor, their expertise, their willingness to maintain the systems that kept civilization functioning. And they were making it clear that this cooperation was contingent on a very simple agreement. Human children were off limits. Elena watched as Quintilian began to speak to the crowd, his translator struggling to render his words into standard. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see the reactions of the humans listening to him. Some looked skeptical, others angry, but all of them were paying attention. That was something. Elena's communicator chimed again. This time the message was from Station Commander Thalex. "Ambassador, the hegemony evacuation ships had arrived. They're requesting immediate departure clearance." Elena looked around the medical bay, at the hundreds of humans who had gathered to protect one injured child, at the aliens who were just beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. She opened a channel to Station Command and spoke clearly enough that her words would be recorded by every intelligence agency monitoring the situation. "Commander Thalex, you may inform the hegemony evacuation ships that departure clearance will be granted as soon as we have resolved the question of accountability for the attack on human civilians." "Ambassador, surely the matter of one injured child doesn't justify—" Elena cut him off. "Commander, the matter is not one injured child. The matter is whether the authorities responsible for protecting civilians can be trusted with that responsibility. Until that question is answered to our satisfaction, no one leaves this station." Elena could hear the sharp intake of breath from the other end of the channel. "Ambassador, you cannot hold an entire station hostage over, Commander." Elena's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "We are not holding anyone hostage. We are simply experiencing technical difficulties with our departure systems. These things happen in complex environments." Elena cut the connection and turned back to watch Quintilian's attempt to explain himself to the humans. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't going well. She could see the crowd's body language shifting, becoming more focused, more dangerous. Colonel Torres stepped up beside her. "Ma'am, what happens if they don't believe him?" Elena touched her grandfather's knife one more time, feeling the weight of generations of protection and promise in its worn handle. "Then he discovers what humans do to monsters, Colonel, and the galaxy learns exactly how seriously we take threats to our children." Elena looked through the medical bay window at Sarah Johnson, who was now sitting up in bed, surrounded by other children who were showing her pictures they'd drawn for her. The little girl was smiling, but Elena could see the way she favored her injured arm. the way her eyes darted toward the door whenever someone new entered her room. Sarah Johnson would heal, but she would never again feel completely safe around alien authorities, and neither would any other human child who learned her story. That, Elena realized, was the real consequence of what Quintilian had done. Not just the physical injury, but the loss of innocence, the introduction of fear into a child's understanding of the universe, and for that there could be no forgiveness. Only consequences. Elena watched the crowd of humans surrounding Quintilian, saw the way they listened to his words with the patience of people who had already decided his fate and were simply giving him the courtesy of final words. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that Elena's grandfather had tried to teach her years ago. Some lines once crossed could never be uncrossed. And humans had very clear ideas about where those lines were drawn. The silence that followed Quintilian's speech was absolute. Elena had heard battlefield quiet before, the kind of stillness that comes when both sides are calculating the cost of the next move. But this was different. This was the silence of a species passing judgment. Eleanor watched the faces of the humans who had listened to Quintilian's explanation. She saw construction workers who had built the station's infrastructure, medical personnel who had dedicated their lives to healing, teachers who had left Earth to educate children among the stars, engineers who kept life support functioning, merchants who had come seeking trade opportunities that would benefit both species. All of them had listened as Quintilian attempted to justify breaking a child's arm for amusement. None of them looked convinced. Dr. Morrison was the first to speak. She stepped forward from the crowd, her medical coat still stained with Sarah's blood, her voice carrying clearly through the medical bay. Officer Quintilian, you've explained your interpretation of regulations, your assessment of proper authority, and your belief that human children need to learn respect for hegemony power structures. Her tone was clinically neutral, the voice of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. What you haven't explained is why you enjoyed it. Quintilian's mandibles clicked in confusion. I don't understand the question. The security footage shows you smiling when the child screamed. Your bio readings, recorded by your own equipment, show elevated satisfaction hormones when you broke her arm. Dr. Morrison consulted her datapad. Officer, you weren't enforcing regulations. You were torturing a child because it made you feel powerful. Elena could see the crowd's reaction to Dr. Morrison's words. The careful patience they had shown during Quintilian's speech was evaporating, replaced by something much more dangerous. These weren't people seeking justice through proper channels. These were parents, teachers, protectors who had just confirmed that Sarah Johnson had been hurt by someone who enjoyed causing pain to children. That's not. I was following proper protocols. Quintilian's translator struggled with his response, rendering his words in broken fragments that only made his guilt more obvious. Chief Engineer Kowalski stepped forward next. Officer, I've got a question for you too. In your explanation, you mentioned that human children need to be properly conditioned to accept hegemony authority. What exactly did you mean by that? Quintilian's compound eyes darted around the crowd, looking for support that wasn't there. The human species has an excessive attachment to their offspring. This creates resistance to proper authority structures. Young humans must be taught early that their emotional attachments cannot supersede legitimate governance. The silence that followed his words was somehow louder than screaming would have been. Elena could see understanding ripple through the crowd like a physical wave. Quintilian hadn't just hurt one child. He had articulated a philosophy that considered human love for their children to be a problem that needed to be solved. Colonel Torres moved closer to Elena, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Ma'am, we've got updates from the other 17 stations. Similar confessions are being recorded. It's not isolated incidents. This is official hegemony policy. Aylin felt something break inside her chest, some last vestige of faith in diplomatic solutions and reasonable compromise. They're systematically targeting our children to break our resistance to their authority. Yes, ma'am. And they're proud of it.
They think it's brilliant strategy. Attack what humans value most. Force us to choose between protecting our families and maintaining our colonies.
Elena looked at the crowd surrounding Quintilian, at the faces of people who had just learned that their children were being deliberately targeted by the galactic authorities they had tried to work with peacefully.
She could see the exact moment when 8,000 humans simultaneously realized that diplomacy was not going to protect their families. A new voice cut through the medical bay. A child's voice, clear and innocent. Sarah Johnson had managed to get out of her hospital bed and was standing at the window of her room, her good hand pressed against the transparent wall.
Why did he hurt me?
she asked, her 8-year-old voice carrying to every corner of the medical bay. I gave him Mr. Snuggles when he asked. I was being good. Why did he break my arm? Elena watched 8,000 humans simultaneously come to the same conclusion. She could see it in their faces, in their posture, in the way they began to move with unified purpose. These weren't random civilians anymore. They were a pack that had identified a threat to their young and was preparing to eliminate it. Elena stepped forward, placing herself between Quintilian and the crowd. Not to protect him, but to establish her authority over what happened next. Officer Quintilian, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the medical bay, you have one more chance to answer the child's question. Why did you hurt her? Quintilian looked at Sarah Johnson through the window, at her broken arm, at the confused pain in her 8-year-old eyes. For a moment, Elena thought she saw something like remorse in his expression. Then he spoke. Because humans need to learn their place in the galactic order. Your species thinks your emotional attachments make you special, but they make you weak. Your children need to understand that their comfort is less important than proper authority. I hurt her because pain teaches lessons that words cannot. The medical bay exploded into motion. 8,000 humans moved as one organism, flowing around Elena toward Quintilian, with the coordinated precision of a pack that had found its prey. Elena saw construction workers reaching for tools that could crack carapace, medical personnel with instruments that could cause precise surgical pain, engineers with knowledge of exactly which nerve clusters would cause maximum suffering. Stop. Elena's voice cut through the movement like a blade. And remarkably, the humans stopped. Not because they had to, but because they chose to respect her authority. For now. Elena looked at Quintilian, who was pressed against the medical bay wall with 8,000 humans surrounding him in a slowly tightening circle. His compound eyes were wide with terror, his mandibles clicking in patterns that his translator couldn't interpret. Officer Quintilian, you've just confessed to the systematic torture of children as a matter of policy. You've admitted that you enjoy causing pain to human families. You've stated that our love for our children is a weakness that needs to be corrected through violence. Elena's voice remained level, professional. Is that an accurate summary of your position? I was following orders, official policy, proper procedures. Yes or no, officer? Do you believe that torturing human children is an acceptable tool of governance? Quintilian looked around the circle of humans, at the faces of people who had heard him describe their love for their children as a weakness to be beaten out of them. He could see his death in their eyes, could smell the pheromones of a pack preparing to kill. Yes, he whispered. Yes, it is acceptable. Ella nodded slowly. She turned to face the crowd of humans, all of them waiting for her decision, all of them ready to follow her lead. Citizens, she said, using the formal term that recognized their status as members of the Terran Colonial Alliance. You have heard Officer Quintilian's confession. You have seen the evidence of his crimes. You have listened to his justification for the systematic torture of our children. Elena paused, feeling the weight of 8,000 lives hanging on her next words. I am hereby invoking Article 7 of the Terran Colonial Charter, which states that when official authorities fail to protect human civilians from systematic harm, the right of protection reverts to the citizens themselves. Alan could feel the crowd's reaction like an electric current. Article 7 was something every human learned in school but hoped never to see implemented. It was the last resort, the final safeguard against exactly the situation they now faced. Officer Quintilian has confessed to crimes against human children as a matter of official policy. The hegemony has demonstrated that they consider our children to be acceptable targets for political control. They have shown that they view our love for our families as a weakness to be exploited through violence.
Elena reached into her jacket and withdrew her grandfather's knife, holding it where everyone could see.
The blade caught the medical bay lights, reflecting the faces of 8,000 humans who had just been given legal authority to protect their children by any means necessary. Under Article 7, Officer Quintilian is hereby remanded to the custody of the human citizens he has wronged, to face justice under human law for crimes against human children. Elena stepped aside, clearing the path between Quintilian and the crowd. The alien looked around desperately, his compound eyes searching for escape routes that didn't exist. Ambassador, please. I was following orders. I didn't understand human cultural sensitivities. I can be retrained, relocated. Please, I have offspring of my own. You should have thought of that before you tortured ours, said a voice from the crowd. Elena recognized it as belonging to Marcus, her aide, the man who said please to vending machines, and thank you to automatic doors. The crowd began to move forward again, and this time, Elena didn't stop them. Article 7 had been invoked, legal authority had been transferred, and justice was now a matter for the citizens to decide. Elena turned away and walked towards Sarah Johnson's room. She didn't want to watch what happened next, but she needed to be there for the little girl who had started this confrontation by refusing to give up her stuffed animal. Behind her, she heard Quintillian scream. Elena found Sarah Johnson sitting on her hospital bed, surrounded by the other human children from the station. They were drawing pictures together, crayon drawings of stars and ships and homes they missed. Sarah was drawing with her good hand, her broken arm cradled carefully against her chest. "Hello, Sarah," Elena said gently. "How are you feeling?" Sarah looked up from her drawing. "My arm hurts, and I miss Mr. Gerald. Snuggles." Elena sat down beside the bed, careful not to disturb the other children. "Sarah, I want to tell you something important. The bad man who hurt you will never hurt another child again." "Did he say he was sorry?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain to an 8-year-old that some people weren't sorry for hurting children, that some people enjoyed causing pain and would never change. "No, sweetheart, he wasn't sorry. But that's okay, because now he can't hurt anyone anymore." Sarah nodded solemnly. The kind of premature wisdom that children develop when they learn too early that the world contains monsters. "Will other bad people try to hurt kids like me?" Elena looked around the room at the other children, all of them listening to her answer, all of them depending on the adults to keep them safe in a universe that had just proven to be more dangerous than they had understood.
Sarah, I want you to understand something very important.
Every human adult on this station, every human adult on every world, every human adult throughout the galaxy has just learnt about what happened to you, and they have all decided that no one will ever hurt a human child again without facing the same justice that the bad man just faced. Elena could hear the sounds from the medical bay beginning to fade. The screaming had stopped, replaced by the efficient sounds of cleanup and disposal. "Sarah, you're safe now. All of you are safe. And you always will be, because we will never let anyone hurt you again." Elena's communicator chimed with a priority message from Earth. She opened it and found a video message from the Prime Minister himself. The message was addressed not to her, but to the human children of Station Kepler 7. Elena activated the message and watched as the Prime Minister's face appeared on the display, speaking directly to Sarah and the other children. "Hello, children. My name is David Chen, and I'm the Prime Minister of Earth. I want you to know that everyone on Earth has heard about what happened to Sarah Johnson today. We know that a bad person hurt her and scared all of you." The Prime Minister paused, and Elena could see the weight of leadership in his expression, the burden of speaking for an entire species in their moment of transition from diplomacy to something much more final. "I want all of you to know that what happened today will never happen again. Not to you, not to any human child anywhere in the galaxy. The adults have made sure of that." The Prime Minister's expression grew more serious. Sometimes, when people try to hurt children, the adults have to make difficult decisions to keep everyone safe. What happened to the bad person today was one of those decisions. It wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about making sure that no one ever thinks hurting children is acceptable. Elena watched the children listening to the Prime Minister's message. They were too young to fully understand the implications of what had happened, but they understood the essential truth. The adults had acted to protect them, and they were safe now. "Children, you don't need to worry about bad people anymore. Every human adult in the galaxy is now watching to make sure you stay safe. Every human ship, every human station, every human world is now dedicated to protecting you. You are the most important thing in the universe to us, and we will never let anyone hurt you again." The message ended, and Elena looked around the room at the children. They had returned to their drawing, but she could see the difference in their posture, in their expressions. They felt protected now, secure in the knowledge that the adults would do whatever was necessary to keep them safe. Elena's communicator chimed again, this time with a message from Colonel Torres. "Ma'am, it's finished. Quintillian is dead. The other security officers are requesting permission to surrender to human custody." Elena felt a strange sense of completion, as if the universe had returned to proper balance. Justice had been served, not through courts or tribunals or diplomatic negotiations, but through the most fundamental law of all. Those who threaten children face the consequences. Elena left the medical bay and returned to the main concourse, where she found a very different scene than the one she had left. The humans were still gathered, but their demeanor had changed. The dangerous, predatory edge was gone, replaced by something calmer but no less determined. Colonel Torres approached her, his uniform stained with evidence of recent activity. "Ma'am, We need to discuss the situation with the other alien authorities. Elena looked around the concourse and realized that the non-human population had effectively vanished. Where is everyone? Barricaded in their quarters, mostly. Some have requested evacuation, others are trying to negotiate safe passage off the station. Torres consulted his datapad. Commander Thalex is demanding immediate departure clearance for the Hegemony evacuation ships. Elena considered this. What's the status of the Hegemony officers who were with Quintilian, in human custody? They're all claiming they were just following orders, that they didn't understand human cultural sensitivities, that they're willing to undergo retraining. Torres's expression was skeptical. They seem to think this was a misunderstanding that can be resolved through proper education. Elena felt a flash of the same cold anger that had driven her to draw her grandfather's knife. Colonel, did any of them express remorse for what happened to Sarah Johnson? No, ma'am. They're concerned about their own safety, but none of them seem to think Quintilian did anything wrong. They keep referring to it as a regrettable incident and suggesting that better communication protocols could prevent future misunderstandings. Elena nodded, understanding that the problem went deeper than one sadistic officer. The entire hegemony power structure was built on the assumption that human children were acceptable casualties in their political games. Colonel, I want you to gather all the alien authorities on this station, not just the hegemony officers. Everyone who holds any position of power over human civilians. I want them assembled in the main conference hall. Yes, ma'am. Any particular reason? Elena looked around the concourse at the humans who had just demonstrated exactly how far they were willing to go to protect their children. She thought about the 17 other incidents that had happened today, about the official hegemony policy of targeting human families, about the need to ensure that this lesson was understood throughout the galaxy. I want to make sure they understand the new rules, Colonel. I want to make absolutely clear what happens to anyone who thinks human children are acceptable targets. Elena made her way to the main conference hall, the same room where she had conducted countless diplomatic meetings over the past 3 years. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Today, it would be where the galaxy learned that humanity's patience with those who threatened their children had reached its end. Elena arrived at the conference hall to find it already filling with alien authorities from throughout the station. She could see fear in their movements, in the way they clustered together for mutual protection, in the way they avoided making eye contact with any of the humans present. Station Commander Thalax was among them, his usually immaculate uniform disheveled, his 4 eyes darting nervously around the room. When he saw Elena, he immediately approached her. Ambassador Vasquez, this situation has gone too far. I understand there was an incident with a human juvenile, but the response has been completely disproportionate. You cannot simply execute hegemony officers without due process.
Elena held up a hand to stop him. Commander, Officer Quintilian wasn't executed.
He was tried and sentenced under human law for crimes against human children. That's not legal. You had no authority. Commander, Elena's voice cut through his protest like her grandfather's knife. Article 7 of the Terran Colonial Charter gives human civilians the right to protect themselves when official authorities fail to do so. Officer Quintilian confessed to the systematic torture of children as a matter of policy. The humans exercised their legal right to protect their families. Elena could see the confusion and terror in Thalex's 4 eyes. He had never encountered a human legal system that put the protection of children above diplomatic courtesy. But, Ambassador, surely there could have been negotiations, compromises, alternative solutions. Commander, what alternative solution would you suggest for someone who enjoys breaking children's arms? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Elena could see Thalex struggling to find an answer that would preserve the fiction that Quintilian's actions were somehow acceptable, somehow within the bounds of normal authority.
Perhaps.
Retraining, cultural sensitivity education, a formal reprimand? Elena stared at him, understanding that she was looking at someone who genuinely believed that the torture of children was a disciplinary matter rather than a capital crime. Commander, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because your life and the lives of everyone in this room depend on your understanding. Elena moved to the front of the conference hall, where every alien authority figure could see her clearly. 18 hours ago, Hegemony Security Officer Vexstar Quintilian deliberately broke the arm of 8-year-old Sarah Johnson while confiscating her stuffed animal under a fabricated regulation. When confronted, he confessed that this was official hegemony policy designed to break human resistance to alien authority by targeting what we value most, our children. Elena could see the alien authorities exchanging glances, some of them beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. Officer Quintillion is dead. He died because he thought human children were acceptable casualties in his power games. He died because he believed that our love for our families was a weakness to be exploited through violence. Elena paused, letting the implications settle into the minds of her audience. I am here to inform all of you that this belief was incorrect. Human love for our children is not a weakness. It is our greatest strength. It is the force that drove us to the stars, the motivation that built our civilization, the power that will reshape this galaxy to protect our young. Elena could see understanding dawning in some of the alien faces, the recognition that they were dealing with a species they had fundamentally misunderstood. From this moment forward, any harm to a human child by alien authorities will be considered an act of war against the human species. Any attempt to use human families as leverage in political negotiations will result in immediate and terminal consequences. Any policy that targets human children for any purpose will be met with the same justice that Officer Quintillion received. Elena reached into her jacket and withdrew her grandfather's knife one final time, placing it on the conference table where everyone could see it. This knife has been in my family for 6 generations. It has been used to protect human children from monsters, from tyrants, from anyone who thought that innocence was something to be destroyed for political gain. Elena looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every alien authority figure present. Today, it joins thousands of other human weapons that have been drawn in defense of our young. Tomorrow, if necessary, it will be joined by millions more. Elena picked up the knife and returned it to its sheath. You have a choice to make. You can recognize that human children are off limits and adjust your policies accordingly. You can work with us to build a galaxy where all children are protected from those who would harm them for political gain. Elena's voice grew cold, final. Or you can test our resolve and discover exactly how far humans are willing to go to protect our families. Elena looked around the conference hall one final time, at the faces of alien authorities who had just learned that the universe had changed in ways they were still struggling to understand. The choice is yours. But understand this. There will be no negotiations, no compromises, no diplomatic solutions when it comes to the safety of our children. There is only protection and consequences. Elena turned and walked out of the conference hall, leaving the alien authorities to contemplate a galaxy where human patience with those who threatened their children had finally reached its end. Behind her, she could hear the sound of urgent discussions, of officials trying to contact their superiors, of people who had just realized that the rules of galactic politics had been rewritten in ways that put the protection of children above all other considerations. Elena returned to the medical bay, where she found Sarah Johnson sitting up in her hospital bed, surrounded by drawings from children throughout the station. The little girl looked up as Elena entered, her 8-year-old face bright with the resilience of childhood. Ambassador Elena, look what everyone made for me. Elena smiled, feeling the first genuine moment of peace she had experienced since this crisis began. They're beautiful, Sarah. How is your arm feeling? It still hurts, but Dr. Morrison says it will be all better soon. Sarah held up a drawing of a spaceship surrounded by stars. I drew this for you. It's your ship, taking all the bad people away so they can't hurt kids anymore. Elena accepted the drawing, seeing in its simple lines and bright colors the faith that children placed in adults to keep them safe. It was a responsibility she had never fully understood until today, but one she would carry for the rest of her life. Thank you, Sarah. This is the most important picture anyone has ever given me. Elena left the medical bay carrying Sarah's drawing, knowing that she would keep it as a reminder of why she had chosen to end diplomacy and embrace something much more fundamental. The promise that every species makes to its young, and the consequences that follow when that promise is broken by those who think children are acceptable casualties in their games of power. The galaxy was about to learn that some promises are written in blood, and some lessons can only be taught through consequences that cannot be negotiated away. 3 months later, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Council in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime, the same hall where humanity had first petitioned for membership in galactic civilization. Today, she carried a different message. The hall was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from 400 species filled the tiered seating, their attention focused on the human delegation with an intensity that bordered on fear. Word of what had happened at Station Kepler 7 had spread throughout known space, carried by refugee ships and emergency dispatches that told the same story. Humans had fundamentally changed the rules of galactic politics. Elena walked to the central podium, her grandfather's knife still at her hip. Sarah Johnson's crayon drawing tucked into her diplomatic portfolio. Behind her sat the human delegation, not diplomats, but the people who had been present when everything changed. Dr. Morrison, Chief Engineer Kowalski, Colonel Torres, Marcus Chen, and others who had demonstrated that human patience with those who threatened their children had limits. At the head of the Galactic Council sat Prime Arbiter Cathexis, the ancient hegemony leader whose species had dominated galactic politics for 3 centuries. His compound eyes fixed on Elena with an expression she recognized as barely controlled rage. Ambassador Vasquez, his translator, rendered his clicks and hisses into precise standard. You have requested this emergency session to address what your species calls the Human Protection Mandate. The Council has agreed to hear your presentation, though many question whether terrorist actions can be legitimized through diplomatic process. Elena activated her presentation display, and the hall filled with images from the past 3 months. Station Kepler 7, now operating as a fully human-controlled facility. The 17 other stations where similar incidents had occurred, all now under human administration. Shipping routes that had been temporarily disrupted due to human technical difficulties. Trade agreements that had been suspended pending safety reviews. Honorable Arbiter, respected delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. I am here to inform the Galactic Council that as of today, humanity has formally withdrawn from all treaties and agreements that do not explicitly recognize the Human Protection Mandate. The hall erupted into chaos. Representatives leapt to their feet. Translators struggled to render hundreds of different expressions of outrage and disbelief. And Elena could see the mathematical reality of galactic civilization beginning to dawn on those who had never bothered to calculate how much their societies depended on human cooperation. Elena waited for the noise to subside, then continued. The Human Protection Mandate is simple. Any action that deliberately harms human children, or any policy that treats human children as acceptable casualties, will result in immediate cessation of all human cooperation with the responsible parties. Prime Arbiter Cathexis's mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as hegemony formal disapproval. Ambassador, you cannot simply withdraw from galactic civilization because of isolated disciplinary incidents involving juveniles. Elena touched the knife at her hip, feeling the weight of everything that had changed since the day Quintilian had broken a little girl's arm. Honored Arbiter, there were no isolated incidents. In the past 3 months, our investigation has revealed that attacks on human children were part of an official hegemony strategy to break human resistance to alien authority. 17 simultaneous incidents, all following the same pattern, all designed to test whether humans would sacrifice our children to maintain our colonies. Elena activated another display showing the classified hegemony documents that human intelligence operatives had recovered from facilities throughout their space. The documents laid out in clinical detail a strategy called emotional leverage exploitation, deliberate targeting of human families to create compliance through terror. The hegemony has spent 3 years developing psychological profiles of human colonists, identifying our attachment to our offspring as what they termed a exploitable weakness. They plan to use threats and violence against our children as a standard tool of governance. Elena could see the effect of her words rippling through the assembly. Many of the non-hegemony species were looking at the hegemony delegation with expressions of horror and disgust, even among species that didn't share human protective instincts. Deliberately targeting children was recognized as fundamentally wrong. Ambassador, another voice called from the assembly. Representative Thyrian of the Kaldorian Federation. Surely there must be some accommodation that can be reached. Your species' response has been extreme. Elena smiled, and somehow that expression was more terrifying than anger would have been. Representative Thyrian, let me share with you the results of human extremism over the past 3 months. Elena activated a new display showing economic data from across human space. Hegemony shipping through human-controlled routes has decreased by 87% due to technical difficulties, with navigation systems maintained by human technicians. Hegemony mining operations have experienced equipment failures that have reduced production by 63%. Hegemony stations and colonies have suffered system malfunctions that have made them uninhabitable for non-human species. The numbers continued scrolling past, each one representing another pressure point that humans had quietly seized control of during 3 years of peaceful integration. Most significantly, hegemony military vessels have experienced maintenance issues that have left 72% of their fleet unable to leave port. It seems that when human technical personnel stop being cooperative, a lot of very expensive warships become very expensive pieces of orbital debris. Elena could see understanding dawning in the faces of the assembly. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through military force. They had done something much more devastating. They had made themselves indispensable, and then demonstrated exactly what happened when that cooperation was withdrawn. Honored delegates, the human species has spent 20 years integrating peacefully into galactic civilization. We have built your stations, maintained your ships, operated your trade routes, and provided technical expertise that has revolutionized your capabilities. Elena's voice grew cold. In return, we asked only that our families be allowed to live safely among you. Elena gestured toward the hegemony delegation. 3 months ago, we learned that this safety was an illusion, that our children were seen not as citizens to be protected, but as leverage to be exploited, that our love for our families was viewed as a weakness to be manipulated through violence. Elena reached into her portfolio and withdrew Sarah Johnson's drawing, holding it up for the assembly to see. The simple crayon picture of a spaceship taking away bad people looked absurdly innocent in the vast formal assembly hall. This drawing was made by 8-year-old Sarah Johnson, after hegemony security officer Vexstar Quintillion broke her arm for refusing to surrender a stuffed animal. Sarah drew this picture because she wanted to thank me for making sure the bad people couldn't hurt children anymore. Eleanor could see the effect of the drawing on the assembly. Something about the simple innocence of a child's artwork made the abstract political discussion suddenly personal, real, urgent. Delegates, Sarah Johnson will heal from her physical injuries, but she will never again feel completely safe around alien authorities. Neither will the thousands of other human children who have learned that there are people in this galaxy who think their pain is acceptable if it serves political purposes. Eleanor returned the drawing to her portfolio. The human protection mandate exists to ensure that no other child has to learn that lesson. Prime Arbiter Cathexis rose from his position at the head of the council, his ancient carapace gleaming under the assembly hall lights. Ambassador Vasquez, your species' emotional attachment to offspring is well documented, but excessive by galactic standards. Most civilized species understand that individual juveniles are expendable in service of greater political necessities. The silence that followed his words was absolute. Elena could feel the attention of 400 species focused on her response, could sense the weight of history pressing down on this moment. Elena drew her grandfather's knife. The blade sang as it cleared the sheath, its worn steel reflecting the lights of the assembly hall like captured starfire. Elena held it where every representative could see it, where the automated recording systems would capture every detail for transmission throughout the galaxy. Honored Arbiter, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the deathly quiet hall, you have just demonstrated exactly why the human protection mandate is necessary. Elena walked slowly around the podium, the knife held casually in her hand, her movement drawing the attention of every security system in the building.
You see our love for our children as a weakness to be exploited.
We see it as the fundamental strength that has carried us to the stars. Elena stopped directly in front of the hegemony delegation. You think individual children are expendable in service of political necessity. We think that anyone who harms children forfeits their right to participate in political discussions. Eleanor could see fear in Cathexis' compound eyes, the recognition that he was facing something his species had never learned to understand. Honored Arbiter, I want you to imagine something for me. I want you to imagine that every human technician, every human engineer, every human pilot, every human specialist throughout your empire has just heard you describe human children as expendable for political purposes. Elena gestured around the assembly hall with her knife, indicating the human delegation, the human translators, the human technical personnel who operated much of the facility's critical infrastructure. I want you to imagine how they might respond to learning that their children's lives are considered acceptable casualties in your political calculations. Elena could see panic beginning to spread through the hegemony delegation as they realized exactly how many humans were present in the assembly hall, exactly how many critical systems depended on human operation, exactly how vulnerable they were to people they had just declared their intention to harm. Ambassador. Cathexis' voice held a note of desperation. Surely we can negotiate. There are no negotiations when it comes to the safety of our children. Elena interrupted. There are only choices. Elena returned her grandfather's knife to its sheath but kept her hand resting on the pommel. Choice 1. You can recognize the human protection mandate. You can acknowledge that human children are off limits for any purpose. You can work with us to build a galaxy where all children are protected from those who would harm them for political gain. Elena's smile held the promise of consequences beyond imagination. Choice 2. You can continue to believe that human children are expendable, and discover exactly what happens when 4 billion humans throughout the galaxy decide that galactic civilization is a threat to their families that needs to be eliminated. Elena activated her presentation display one final time, showing a single image that made the entire assembly hall gasp in horror. It was a tactical display of human positions throughout known space. Every human colony, every human-operated facility, every human crewed ship, every human specialist working in alien facilities.
The galaxy was full of humans, and they were all connected. Delegates, you see the result of 20 years of peaceful integration. Humans are everywhere, in your civilizations, operating your most critical systems, maintaining your most essential infrastructure, providing expertise that your societies can no longer function without.
Elena let the implications sink in before continuing. Every one of those humans has just learned that the Galactic Council considers their children to be expendable for political purposes. Every one of them is now choosing between loyalty to galactic civilization and loyalty to their families. Elena could see representatives frantically accessing their own internal reports, calculating exactly how dependent their civilizations had become on human cooperation, realizing that their entire way of life was suddenly hanging by a thread held by people who had just been told their children didn't matter. The Human Protection Mandate is not a threat, delegates. It is a promise. It is our species' commitment to ensure that no child, human or alien, will ever again be considered an acceptable casualty in someone else's political games. Elena looked around the assembly hall, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had never truly understood what humans were capable of when their families were threatened. But the choice is yours. You can accept that human children are off limits and work with us to build a better galaxy. Or you can test our resolve and discover that humans who consider their civilization a threat to their children tend to solve that problem in very direct ways. Elena gathered her materials and prepared to leave the podium. The Human Protection Mandate goes into effect immediately. Any species that wishes to maintain cooperative relationships with humanity will need to formally acknowledge it. Any species that prefers to test our commitment to protecting our children, Elena's hand moved to her knife one final time. Well, the galaxy is full of examples of what happens to those who make that choice. Elena walked away from the podium, followed by the human delegation. Behind her, she could hear the assembly hall erupting into chaos as representatives began calculating the cost of opposing a species that had quietly become essential to galactic civilization and had just demonstrated they were willing to burn it all down to protect their children. Elena left the assembly hall knowing that everything had changed forever. The galaxy would never again operate on the assumption that human cooperation could be taken for granted. The galaxy would never again treat human children as acceptable casualties. Some species would adapt to the new reality, would learn to work within a framework that put the protection of children above political convenience. Others would test human resolve and discover exactly why. In 400 years of human expansion into space, no alien species had ever successfully occupied a human world. Elena touched the knife at her hip one final time and thought about Sarah Johnson, who was now playing safely on a station where no alien authority would ever again consider her an acceptable target. Some promises, Elena had learned, were worth any price. Some lines, once drawn, could never be crossed again. And some species, when they finally decided to stop being patient, could remake the entire galaxy around the simple principle that children should be allowed to grow up safely among the stars. Elena looked up at those stars through the assembly hall's transparent dome and smiled. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what humans were willing to do for their young. It was going to be educational for everyone involved.